Hello, and welcome to this presentation. Like I said, my name is Daniel Richter from the Technical Department at AXI Americas, and today we're going to do a training about the operator called AXI for swing gates. And I'm going to do overview of the features and basically the installation, the configuration of the control board. And so let's start right now. First, let's do an overview of the typical installation, basically the parts. Obviously, there are the operators. It can be one for one gate or two operators. There's also the control board. These operators, all of the operators for CAME they need a control board. They don't work by themselves. They're just motors with an encoder and stuff, but they need a control board. It's usually in a box close to the installation. There's a remote control. Usually it's optional, but usually the client wants remote controls. So you need so that's the part. The selector, it could be a button inside the property, maybe outside the property, maybe a keypad, maybe anything that is wired and give commands to the automation. Warning lights, obviously, it's good to have some lights blinking for warning that the operators are moving. Sometimes it can be configured to also blink while it's waiting for auto closing. So it warns the users, anyone close, that is about to close. Photo cells, we always recommend having photo cells. In this case, two pairs is recommended, one for the inside, one for the outside. Well, they're working as a pairs, or there's also the type that is with a reflector, but we recommend the ones that works in pairs because it's more secure and it's more reliable. Junction box, obviously all the pipes, all the goes through the wiring. They go to the junction box to go to where it needs to be. The physical stops, we recommend having physical stops for the close and for open. Basically something physical that stops the gate for moving. Even though the operators can be configured to stop in certain positions, we always recommend still having some kind of stops just in case. Basically, it's a safety feature, just in case it don't hit something or maybe it closes too far and damages the hinge or stuff like that. So that's recommended. And courtesy light, that's optional, but it's sometimes it's good to give the option to the client. It can have like some kind of lighting the pathway, and it can be stay on for a few minutes after a cycle for closing or opening. And obviously we need to point out the danger zones. You have to be aware and tell anyone close to be aware of the danger zones, because obviously there's entrapment dangers. Don't put your fingers close to the hinge. There's also electricity, 110 volts in the control box. So obviously have the normal precautions. And now the selection criteria, because we have so many kind of operators and depends on each situation. So one of the things you have to select, we're going to talk about the AXI, the operator called AXI. But so you have to first see the site and evaluate what kind of operator you're going to suggest or you're going to use. The AXI, for example, is just for single home establishments. And there's also for commercial and industrial, but that will be another type of operator because this AXI is not for continuous use. So that's why we recommend this one to be just for a single home. If you, for example, you're going to see a site and it needs to open and close for many multifamily condos or maybe a commercial application, you will have to use another kind of operator. So that's why you first have to be aware where you're going to install it and what is going to be the requirements. So pay attention to that. The AXI in particular we're talking about today, only for single home. So it's going to open and close only a few times a day. Another characteristics, you have to be aware, maybe choose one that uses encoder, or maybe use batteries or 230 volts, maybe 120. And this one in particular is the AXI, works with 24 volts DC. And the control box and the control board, it has a transformer to 120 volts to 24, and it converts it to DC. So that part you have to be aware what's the situation in the site. Also, you choose depending on the how much is going to be used. And like I said, is enough for continuous use, or it doesn't matter. So other characteristics you have to be aware. Another selection criteria very important to pay attention is the type of door, the length, and the weight. Obviously, the type of door will be swing gate, but you have to be also aware that maybe you need maybe there's an obstruction, a wall, or basically choosing based on what they want, the client wants, also how they look, the operator. There are many types. Later, I'm going to show more about that, and later I'm going to show also the installation and all that. The length is very important because each operator has a limit of length, each leaf, each door, basically, how long it is. It's very important because when it's too long, obviously it has too much momentum, and it could damage the operator if you go over the specs. And also the weight is very important. Obviously, all operators have a limit of how much weight can handle for each leaf. And later, I'm going to show more specs about that. Another selection criteria is the width of the pillar, or maybe it's a wall. Obviously, it has to accommodate the base or whatever you want to put there, the operator. So that depends on what operator you want to select too. The AXI in particular is very thin. It's very, so it can fit basically in every place. Well, there are other kind of operators that are wider, and you will have to choose depending on that. So another criteria is the value C. You have to remember that value because it's very important. As that's the measurement between the surface where you want to put the operator over here and the hinge of the gate. That value is very critical because obviously the farther they are, the less the farther it's going to be from the operator, and it's going to be harder to reach. And the operator has a limit, physical limit, of how long is the travel. So obviously all operators that works this way has that limit. So that C value you're going to see in the specs and the manual, and the C value you have to be sure to not be over that. And the AXI is 60 millimeters. And later I'll show more details about that. But remember that value C is important. That value between where it's going to be installed the operator and the hinge. That value it cannot be higher than the specs. Basically, that's one of the criteria. If that value is higher, then for example, you will not choose the AXI. You would choose maybe the AXO or the ATS, another all modes that can handle that value C. Another value is I, but that's more obvious because obviously if there's an obstruction there, you need to be aware that the operator doesn't hit maybe a wall, maybe some pole or something. Obviously, you need space for the operator. That's more simple, but I wanted to point it out. I wanted to also show types of travel limits. There are many types depending on the operator. There's one type that use electronic operator delay, basically a timing. I don't know if you have experience with the control boards, especially the old ones. They used to work with timing. Maybe you manage to 15 seconds will take to open, for example. So it passes 15 seconds and then stops. But usually that's not popular anymore. But I wanted to show that it's still possible. Sometimes people still use it that way. A way to configure the control board, basically. There's also with limit switches. That's very popular. That use a limit switch. Basically, you can adjust a switch for the opening and for the closing. So that way, when it hits the switch, it will stop the operator know that you reached the limit. And also the optical magnetic encoders. That's the one they use AXI. It's an encoder that basically is a revolution counter that knows that way when doing a calibration, when you install it, you can the control board can know exactly where the gate is, and that way it can do a slowdown and basically do the operations that way and know exactly when it's going to reach the limit. And then in the case of the AXI, there's also physical limit that you adjust inside the operator. Later, I'm going to show more details about that. And you use the encoder also for know exactly where it is. That's the way. So this is the operators we have for swing gates. this basic overview of them. I'm not going to show exactly all of them. But I want to point out that the three types: articulated arm, warm drive, and underground. The articulated arm, one of the advantages is that it can reach, remember the value C that I was talking about, the value between the surface when it's going to be mounted and the hinge. That value can be higher because basically the operator can be farther from the hinge, from the door. And since this is an articulated arm, it can reach farther from that. The warm drive, and actually we're going to talk about AXI today, is a warm drive operator. It's actually one of the cheapest and simplest operator from the family. There's also the ATS, AXO, ATI, Amico. And so the AXI is a different way to do the moving the gate. That later I'm going to show more how to install. And the underground is basically underground. You don't see the operator, you just study the gate. So they make a hole in the ground and they install it that way. There's three models, but today I'm going to focus on AXI. So this is for the warm drive. This basically comparison. Mostly I want to point out the value C, what I was talking about. So the AXI that is over here, like I said, it has a limit of 60 millimeters. It can be the C value is very low. Like I said, for a home that has a small gate and the value is short, it can work fine. If you see that, for example, it's 100 millimeters, then you will go for another model. Maybe the AXO is very popular, or maybe the ATS, depending on those criteria. Also the weight and the length of the gate. In this case, for example, AXI has a maximum limit of 2.5 meters. It will be 8 feet for gate. That's the maximum length of each gate. And also a maximum weight of 300 kilograms or 661 pounds. So then that limit, also you have to be aware that it is not it's relevant. It cannot be 205 meters, 2.5 meters, and also 300 kilograms. I'm going to show more later about that. But for now, I'm going to show how it's basically the basic features. This is the AXI, that's the way it's mounted. This is the way it moves. It's basically a static way to do the automation. There's also with articulated arms. Some people prefer that way, but some people prefer this type. So this operator is irreversible, meaning that when it stops, you cannot move it by hand. You can lock it and move it by hand, but in normal operation, you cannot move it. So obviously, that's the most popular type. And there's other kind of operators that there are both versions, but this one also is irreversible. For swing gate, lifts up to 2.5 meters, like I said. Equipped with an encoder for slowdown management, mechanical travel ends. I'm going to show later how to adjust that. 3-4 volts allows to installing batteries. Some people use it with solar panels. And so that's very good for that installation on the left and right side. That's another advantage of this operator. And you can buy it and mount it in the left or right side without any differences. They used to be sometimes before, it used to have operators for the left side and for the right side. That was confusing. So from some time ago, we just do operators that can manage both sides. This is the table I was going to show. This is the comparison between the maximum weight, this is in the left, and the horizontal axis. It shows the maximum length of each gate. So, like I said, it can be 2.5 meters, but the maximum weight in that length is actually 250 kilograms. So you have to be aware of that. Sometimes get confused, and some operators have this range is higher, the difference. So it can manage basically the limits are only by themselves. It can be also 300 kilograms, but it can be only around 1.8 meters, for example. So you need to be aware of that. Those limitations, don't get close to them because it's going to cause problems. It's going to damage the operator. So just make sure that it's inside the specs. And this is the technical data. One of the things very relevant here will be maximum current, there will be 5 amps. That's the maximum peak current. Some people that's relevant because they use solar panels and that they need to know what kind of batteries and solar panels to use. So you can later see this and if you need some specs. So the release, like I said, all operators have that release knob or key. In the case of the AXI, it has a small key, plastic key. First is a cover that covers that part. Then the key, you turn it like a 90 degrees, and then there's a lever that you can push it up, and then it releases the operator. You can move it by hand. And obviously, you will do the reverse for closing, for locking the operator again. Would you, in that case, you cannot move it by hand. And so this is the parts that come in the box. It's very basic. It's just the operator and the brackets for the actual wall or pillar or whatever you're going to install it, and also for the part that's going to be in the gate. And this is the way to install it. Obviously, you need to be aware how high you want to put it, depending on the situation. That's very important that you pay attention where you're going to put it. Although you do that in the manual, suggests some distances, some measurements, but at the end you have to do it in the site and just to that. So first you put the base that is going to be the main base. It's going to be in the wall or the column. And it's important to put grease there because it's basically a metal hinge. And after that, you put the other bracket in the leaf. Depending on if it's close, you're going to put it close to the limit for the top limit of the operator. Because when it's going to close, it moves inwards. So that's the way you can adjust where to put it. And also, obviously, put it horizontal so it looks good and also works better. And so after that, to adjust the travel limits, you have to open, there's two covers. It's very simple. It's just one screw for one cover, and the other cover is two screws after that. And then you remove it. And when you remove it, you'll see the one drive with the motor. And there's two limits for each side, one for the closing, one for opening. And there's basically a ring that goes around the worm drive. And you can unscrew it and loose it and then move it in a way to adjust where you want it to be, depending on for the closing and for the opening. And then you tie the screw to leave it there. So the car is moving with the gate is going to reach that. It's a physical limit, basically. And then the control board is going to know that it reached the limit and it stops the motor. So now when that's ready, now you're ready for the connections. The connection is very simple. For two gates, there's two wires for each operator. And for each, all control boards have these connectors that say M1, N1, and ENC1. That would be motor number one. We'll call that motor number one. And same for motor number two. If using just one motor for one gate, the thing is that you have to connect it in M2. Okay, that's one thing some people get confused. So if it's only one motor, just follow the diagram and manual. And it's on M2, M2, and ENC2 if it's just one motor. So this is another way to install it. Obviously, most gates open inwards to the inside of the property, but sometimes there's gates that open to the outside, and that can be installed that way without problem. The only thing you have to do differently is that the bracket, you have to cut it and basically put a piece of metal to extend it. And that way the operator doesn't hit the gate. See, if it will be too close, it will hit the gate, and obviously we need some clearance there. And if you do it this way, you're going to reverse M2 and N2, you're going to reverse it. Basically, those three wires, M and N, is the DC motor. It's directed to this DC motor. One way we do sometimes with testing is put a battery there and see if the motor moves. So obviously if you install this to open outwards, you have to reverse those two so the motor goes to the reverse direction. That's the only difference in connection that you have to do. Later in the configuration, if you notice that it's instead opening and closing, you can revert that. So there's not really that much of an issue. And the third wire is for the encoder. I was talking about that. So control boards. After how we have the connection, where to connect. So there are many types of control boards that can manage these operators, the AXI and other operators. But the new ones are the CLX24M and the CLX24S. So there's two versions of these new control boards. One obviously is smaller and has less feature, and the bigger one has more features and it has a graphic display. Actually, I'm going to do an overview of the differences between those two. Basically, they do the same thing, is control the operators, but depending on the situation, maybe you want one version over the other one. I will show mostly the configuration for the S version, but the basic steps and the connections, everything is the same. So, like I said, this version is bigger the box, so you can have more feature, more devices. You can handle. You can put inside the box. You can put even matrix. You can put sometimes an external receiver. Also has a graphic display. The other one has a 7-segment display. This S version has a cover, and I already have a training for these two boards independently. We're doing about more features, about all the options. But for now, I'm doing a just quick overview. The S version has 4 inputs for safety inputs. The M version only had 2. They're all capable of real system, both system. The S version has a clock, so you can have a timer. All that, those features. Like I said, I'm going to be quick so we can go through the basic stuff. So the connection, again, this is the way to connect. Is simple. So, okay, this one is the delay between two operators. Sometimes when there's 2 gates, the one overlap the other. And in those cases, by default, actually, it comes when you configure 2 gates, when you'll notice that the motor number 2, M2, is going to open first. And then a few seconds later, the M1 is going to open. So there's a delay between those two. Like I said, it's just for preventing them from hitting each other. And same for closing. For closing, M1 will close first, and a few seconds later, the M2 will close. So that way they overlap each other and they don't hit. There's a space for each other. I know I point out this because if that's the case, maybe you have a revert and it's doing the opposite. Maybe M1 is trying to move and M2 is the second gate is not leaving the other one to move, and you have to revert those two. It's very simple with a connector, just swap them. And also, if the gate don't overlap each other and you want to open and close at the same time, in that case, the delay, you can put it to 0, basically disable that delay for opening and for closing. So that's why I wanted to point that out. Also, connections for giving commands. Both control boards have the same port. So one thing to remember is that pin 2 is the common, and we use the common for giving commands for safety devices. It's very important to at least keep in mind that pin 2 is the common. And what we do with the common, is to, for example, to give a command to open, you will do a push, a normally open contact between 2, the common, and for example, 3. And 3 is, like I said, in the manual shows, is for opening. Actually, it's always open. 2 and 3, do a pulse, and it opens. And 2 and 4 is basically the opposite, and 2 and 4 just closes. You want to do this, both things. It's very popular to use the 7, pin 7. Pin 7 is open and close, open and close. And you can configure also to do open, stop, close, stop, depending on how you configure. So it's more versatile. So being also pin 1 and 2, that's a safety feature that you can enable. That one you have to enable it because it's a normally close contact, and that's for a toll stop. If you enable that feature, if pin 1 and 2 is open, the operator is not going to work. Sometimes we have people that says it doesn't work, and they have that feature enabled and they don't have anything connected there. So by default, it's disabled, but still some people enable it by accident, and then that have a problem. So if you, or maybe you need that feature, so make sure you enable total stop, and you're going to know that between 1 and 2 it has to be close to work. If you open that contact, then the operator is going to be disabled. Sometimes you use a selector and a button for basically disable the operator connected there. This is the connection for the lights. It's very basic. Between 10 and E is the most common. It's just a strobe when it's moving. There's also between 10 and E3 that can be also a light, and also it can be configured. And also between 10 and 5 is you can put also a light. Or very commonly, you can use a relay, 24-volt relay, to maybe give an indication of the gate that is open, or maybe disable a barrier when it's used in conjunction with a barrier. And there's a very interesting port. So between 10 and 5, remember, it's always 24 volts, except when it's closed. When it's closed, there's no voltage. That's very interesting. Also, very important to know is that 10 and 11, that's 24 volts, but that's always giving power, basically to accessories. All the accessories you can power there if it's 24 volts AC. It's only going to be DC if you use batteries. But all accessories usually can take AC and DC, so that's not really a problem. So 10 and 11, remember 24 volts. And between 10 and 2, you get 12, by the way. And also there's a connection for the electrolock. Well, there you go. And this is how you connect the photocell. Obviously, you need to give power to the photocell. In this case, it's 10 and 2. So it's very simple. Each photocell is different. So maybe if it needs 24 volts, you can put it between 10 and 11. Like I said, 24 volts. And also the photocell is going to give you a normally closed contact. The common, you will put it on 2. Like I said, 2 is the common in common. And normally closed is going to be in either of the inputs, safety inputs. In this case, the CLX24S has 4 inputs. And they by default are disabled. So if you want to connect it to CX, for example, you have to enable CX, and then tell the operator, the control board, what you want to do with the CX. And usually the option is C1. I'm going to show you later about that. In the configuration, the way you configure once we have all the connections is with a display and 4 buttons. The display is different between control boards, and this one is a graphic display, but basic steps and also the buttons is very, very similar. So we have 4 buttons. The escape, obviously you go backwards. The left and right arrow, obviously we can navigate through the menu. We also can give comments to open and close. I will show you later that. And enter, obviously, to confirm an option, also to go to the menu. The first thing if you want to go to the menu, just press enter once. That's it. So to show that, the basic steps I'm going to show you later in a small video they're going to go through is an amount. The first step is amount of motors. Basically, you have to tell the control board how many motors do you install, 2 or 1. It's just 2 options. Motor type. Obviously, these control boards can manage many types of operators. Actually, can manage any type of operator if it's 24 volts DC. If it's inside the specs with a current, you can manage any motor. Choose a generic, for example. In this case, you would choose AXI. I'll show you later that part. Enabling safety devices. So it gives you. So if you want to use a photocell or maybe multiple photocells that want to use different things, you have to enable them and tell them what to do. Add users, that will be your remote controls, keypads, maybe a proximity card. So you have, that's the next step, adding those. Show you later that. And the last step is trouble calibration. Obviously, like I said, installation, where you do everything complete, and the control board has to learn all the trouble with encoder to know exactly when you reach the close and opening position. So I'll do that. And trouble calibration to just do that automatically and learns the trouble. And then it's ready. So I'm going to show the small video, going through the steps of the basic configuration I was talking about. I press enter to go to the menu. They have different languages, but by default it's in English, so there's no problem. So you navigate with the left and right arrow. The first option is configuration. Then you can press enter. And one thing I recommend is to start the wizard that I'm going through the basic, all the configuration, but the wizard is going to go through the basic steps automatically, so that it's easy. That way, it's easier to configure. At least the basic steps. There's other options, but obviously you can later do and change those. So you go to configuration and wizard, and so we press enter to confirm and get to the wizard. And it's going to give the first step is the amount of motors. In this case, I have only M2. That's only one motor. If by any chance you have two operators, and then go use the arrows and choose M1 and M2. And it's very clear what it's going to use, because sometimes people think there's only one operator, it's going to be M1. No, one operator is connected to M2. So press enter to confirm, and then ask for a motor type. In this case, you would choose AXI, but in the example in the video, I had a furnace, so that's why I'm choosing that. And also there's a motor check. That's a very useful feature. You press left arrow to open motor number 1 and right arrow to open motor number 2. So when you have only one gate, press the right arrow and hold it, and it's going to open while you hold it. If it closes, for example, you know that you have to revert the motor. And if it doesn't move, you have to check the wiring. And so it's a very useful feature. Then you have to enable and or disable the inputs for safety features. In this case, I have a photo cell in CX, like I showed before. So that's why I'll choose CX, and in choosing C1, that's the reopen while closing. That's the most common option. So I'll put C1 and press enter to confirm that in CX. Then ask you the same for the input CY. I told you there was 4 inputs. So since you don't have anything connected there, you leave it off. Same for CZ and CK. Leave it off. And the next step is add users. That's optional. But if you have a remote control, you need the AF card to be installed. That's one thing to keep in mind. And also you have to tell what you want the button to do. Step by step would be open and close. And you press once, it opens, and press again and closes. Very common is sequential, that is open, stop, close, stop. So depending on what the client wants, you would configure depending on that. Some people want the button just to open, but in this case, in this demonstration, I'll do sequential and press enter. And then it's ready to receive the signal from the remote control. Just press the remote control button, and then it's ready to do that when it's in normal operation. You can configure multiple remote controls at the same time, basically. And the last step is trouble calibration. It's going to confirm yes. So like I said, it's going to close automatically when you confirm yes. It's going to close automatically and open automatically. And after that, it's going to be ready to just work normally. And then you can do other optional features. I'm going to show a few of them, the most common ones. One thing that you can do is if it's not in the menu, you can use the left arrow to open and the right arrow to close. Remember, it has to be outside of the menu to do that. You can press also escape for stopping the gate. And one of the features that maybe you want to change is in configuration and motor settings and run settings, sorry. And is the opening speed. By default is 70%, and you might want to change it to 100%. So it goes to the maximum speed that it can handle. So that's for opening speed, and also for closing speed, you have to do the same. That's optional, but I recommend it. Another thing to maybe change is the automatic closing. So that will be in times, configuration, and times. You can configure the automatic closing. The first option actually has automatic close. So by default, it's off, but you can set it up to a few seconds, and that's the amount of seconds going to be open before closing automatically. That's one of the most common options. Obviously, there are more features and stuff that you can check in the manual. There's also a training about these boards. It's more in depth. Well, for now, that's it for the training for installation of the AXI and the configuration. We also put videos on YouTube about how to configure. So if you don't remember a step or something, you can also check out those, especially how to configure the control boards. Sometimes if you're confusing on the connection, so you can follow those videos and be more it's easier besides the manual, because the manual can be have too much information and sometimes it's confusing. So always check out those, and we also always available for phone call, maybe email, and so don't be shy to reach out to us. We're always here to help. And so thank you for your attention, and see you on the next time. Bye bye.